My name is Karen Becker, and I'm pleased to introduce to you today Donna Gingera. Donna is known as a go-to person for emergency school preparedness across North America. Her approach to K-12 emergency management is practical, methodical, and evidence-based. Her heartfelt passion stems from personal involvement in tragic school incidents. The impact of those events led to the creation of Hour Zero School Emergency Program, a Canadian company where Donna has served as CEO for the past 17 years. She is a regular presenter at conferences across North America, sharing her wealth of knowledge from the field of studies on emergency management and risk communication at Harvard, Johns Hopkins, and the University of Maryland. Prior to Hour Zero, Donna held positions with the government, educational institutes, K-12, and post-secondary and Canadian law. So please join me in a warm PSBAA welcome for Donna Gingera.
Thanks, Karen. Thanks, Karen. With me today, I have my esteemed panel, and I'd like to just take a moment to introduce them to you. On my far left is Laura Polis. Laura is the superintendent for High Prairie School District, and she's been with this, yay, High Prairie. Laura's been with the school district for a number of years, actually 31 years, but she doesn't look it, and but she's been the superintendent there for the past 8. She originally hails from the Calgary area and then migrated north. Her mother was actually a teacher, so she comes from those roots, along with a farming family. I'm going to just, can you hear me okay? I usually don't use a mic, so I have one of those teacher voices, right, that project. Next to Laura is Brian Angelic, and Brian is the superintendent for Prairie Rose School District. Yay, Prairie Rose. And Brian's been the superintendent there for the past 6 years. Prairie Rose, if you don't know the district, is one of the largest geographical districts spread in the province and stems in the southeast corner of the province. So we've got the north and the south covered, and from central we have Aaron Masson, and Aaron is with Hour Zero, and he's an industry expert. Aaron is one of the principals there, and he's worked with hundreds of schools across North America in the field of emergency preparedness, and has actually trained thousands of teachers in the area of emergency preparedness. So those are our esteemed panel. What we are doing today is we're going to actually go through a series of giving you a profile perspective of what emergency preparedness in your school district should look like. It's probably very top of mind given the situation with Fort McMurray. We've been working with the Fort McMurray school districts for quite some time now, and so some of the first-hand learnings that are coming out of there have been inspiring because of the way that they're being able to handle it, but also a lot of it's also eye-opening in some respects, because often school emergencies are thought of in the perspective of a few minutes, a fire drill or a lockdown drill that takes 10 minutes. It doesn't take 10 months, doesn't take 3 years. And so that's the reality of what we're dealing with, actually, is, you know, your schools may be prepared. Are you as a district prepared? And we're going to try and focus and give you some enlightenment into what that might mean for you. So all of you have clickers at your tables. Do you see them? This is a participation program here. We don't And so with your clickers, if you want to just pick those up, and if you're able to answer that question just by clicking on to A, B, or C, we'll get a little bit of a perspective of what's happening. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to just keep going. So everybody have a clicker now? Good. So as a board member, one of the first things that you do is actually promise to your constituents safe and caring schools. And as trustees, you entrust your staff to actually deliver on that promise. That's the directive that you give to them, and we see that on every website of a school district that you go to, regardless of where your school district is located. But in the words of former President Ronald Reagan, trust but verify. So you're trusting your schools to do that, and you need to verify that it actually is happening to ensure that each one of your staff and students are prepared and that each one of your staff and students are safe within their environment. In addition to that, you're also part of a larger community. Often what will happen is that in the world of emergency preparedness in school districts, the scope of what you have to deal with often gets muddled in with OH&S programs, with crisis intervention, with risk management, with business continuity, disaster planning, and risk and crisis communication. Today, what we're going to hone in on is the element of emergency preparedness, because the scope of what your district safety plan is far beyond just any one of those single elements. We need to look at that broader umbrella of what it actually means. So I'm going to ask you this now. From your perspective, is your plan complete? Is your emergency plan complete? Okay, that's our profile that we're starting from. When it comes to emergency preparedness, you actually need more than just a plan. You need a program. And we're going to discuss what those elements of those programs are and what you should be looking for at your school district. To start with, have you completed a risk assessment? Erin, can you just pull this a little bit closer to me? I didn't know that. Does your budget process look at risk mitigation strategies? Don't worry, you'll see there, you see at the top it says anonymous. We're not recording these by each one of yours. Now, you might have asked during the course of those questions, what is a risk assessment and what does it mean to have mitigation strategies? As part of the panel discussion, I'm going to first call upon Erin Masson to give you what an industry standard or regulation requirement is related to what risk assessments and mitigation strategies are for school districts. And then I'm going to call upon our guests from each one of the respective school districts to provide you with some examples of success stories within their own school districts of what they're doing. So Erin, could I have you open with that, please?
Yes, good morning, everyone. So assessment and mitigation. So assessment right off the bat is about the identification of things that might cause us problems from an emergency management standpoint. So there's various assessments that we could do. Once we've done that, the mitigation really becomes how can we either avoid this problem from happening, or how can we lessen the impact of, if it did occur, how could we have a better result? So doing assessments, it's often advisable to draw upon different experts. Some of that expertise can happen from inside the district. We might have people from the district office who go and visit schools and do a review with the schools. The schools themselves can actually do some reviews, so just making sure that fire exits aren't blocked, looking at certain fire code items. There's opportunities to draw upon outside experts. Some of those could be a part of the community, so you might have fire and police. On occasion, it may be advisable to bring in an outside consultant to help with that review as well. Once you've identified potential problem areas, then really the question becomes, well, what can we do about that? And often there's different potential things, different potential answers, and sometimes there's a clash of culture that can occur. So we might find that we want to improve some of the security at the school. And things change over time as well. So if we go back a little while ago, we may have found that all of our schools had open doors. All the doors were open. So it was something, it's part of an open and caring environment. Really anybody could gain access. Over time, we've seen a progression. So maybe now we only have one door open or a few doors. We've seen schools in Alberta that now have locked doors during the day. There might be a vestibule. So really things change over time. So from a clash of culture standpoint, what's appropriate for your school district? In Alberta, we haven't seen any examples of having metal detectors or security people basically frisking people down, but there are examples of that. So it is something that you do want to review on an annual basis. So things that may not be appropriate for today might be some things that you consider for later on. So this should be an annual process. You do want to tie it to your budgets as well. So if you've identified things that you want to tackle, it's something where you don't want to not have the funding for that. So working it into the budget cycle becomes important. There may be different solutions for things. So when we're looking at lockdowns, are we considering changing door lock sets? Are we looking at adding a add-on to the door? Or is it a policy change where we might actually just have people lock doors during the day so that we can quickly get into a lockdown? So as part of the mitigation side of things, there may be things we can do to lessen. We may also want to consider an all-hazard approach. So sometimes we can't anticipate all the things that can happen to us, but we want to have some good tools in place so we can deal with whatever happens.
Thanks, Aaron. Laura, can I ask you to draw upon some of your experiences at High Prairie as to mitigation strategies and assessments that you've done there?
Sure, Donna. So I'm going to talk about two things. One is school risk assessments. At each one of our sites, at each one of our schools, there's specific risk management, manages site hazards. So each school will go through an exercise to assess the risks, the incident protocols, such as assault, bomb threat, severe vandalism, medical emergencies, etc. So in one of our schools, for example, there's a railroad running behind it, and it has an uploading station. So there's a risk assessment in place for that. The school assigns a weighting for frequency, magnitude, and severity so that they can develop mitigation strategies around that. And I'll talk a little bit about the after-action reports. For example, after the Slave Lake fires, we had a community consultation, and fire and police were involved in that meeting that we had, and then a comprehensive report was developed from that. And we were able to discuss what we did right and what we did well, and what we could have done better. And it's all for learning and improving.
Thank you, Laura. Brian, from the things that you're doing at Prairie Rose, can you just expand on those for us?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. I think the role of the superintendent in terms of the work with the board, schools, and communities, risk mitigation is probably one of maybe the most important role I have. Different boards, different schools, different communities. We have 15 different communities, and communities have different comfort levels with risk and so forth. So back to some of Aaron's comments, we have different procedures in different schools depending on that level of comfort. So in some of our rural remote schools, they'd have all the doors open today. It's interesting scenario that went along with that. Is kind of out in the middle of nowhere, and you would think would be the safest place in the world, and yet with the power of social media, we became aware that a sex offender had escaped and was on the highway. The highway would pass by probably less than a kilometer off of our school, and that school is out in the middle of nowhere. So I mean, along with that, you think it's really super safe, but also very, very isolated and 2.5 hours away from division office. Again, the power of hour zero, I guess, and some of the tools in there. Thank goodness somebody was monitoring, and we were able to put in some procedures very quickly just around making sure that kids and staff were safe. So, I think that's one thing is the, kind of the role of the central office, I suppose, and the superintendent, and then a level of risk as well. But again, Hour Zero has all kinds of tools to help with the risk assessments, right? So we did a lot of survey work. In our model, our occupational health and safety person also has lots of training, around all of this as well. And so we rely on her a lot. I mean, there's all kinds of different models in terms of who's trained and what kind of position you'd have to help deal with some of this. And also very, very detailed walkthroughs, like Aaron mentioned, with someone who has some training. I do monitoring reports, so I expect all of our schools to have some kind of Hour Zero strategy in their education plan. In other words, kind of what is it that you're going to do to improve your level of risk mitigation, and our goal is just to try and get a little bit better every year, to try to learn a little bit more every year, to budget a little bit more every year on an ongoing basis. We've been involved since 2010 in Hour Zero, and I would say we still have lots to learn. So patience, I think, is, just realistic expectations is another kind of part of this. But through the monitoring reports, look to see how our schools are doing, especially with their training. We do expect them to review some of the material every year. It's online. A lot of it is that, individuals can work at their computer or they can sit around a screen, very much like today, and go through the training together. And our risk mitigation person reminds me that every time she said, "Oh, you were just out at that school working with that principal on your education plan monitoring reports, weren't you?" Because I just got a whole bunch of calls. And of course, often the schools are doing the work, and literally, sometimes they forget to hit the enter button. So all of the work that they've done doesn't get registered. I mean, all they have to do is go back and hit the enter button. But I mean, I get monitoring reports every month in terms of each of our sites and where they're at with their compliance around the safety protocols that we expect them to have. So.
Thank you, Brian. So that gives you a little bit of a scope of some of the backgrounds that people do. We often see people, school districts will launch into developing a plan, but what is that plan based on? And have they done the risk and hazard assessments that you're actually trying to mitigate against? And what are expensive strategies? What are no-cost strategies and more philosophical changes that you need to make within your operating structures? How many people have overall responsibility for your emergency program at your school district? How many people within your school district have overall responsibility? I could alter that, but we would delay it. Okay, majority or pretty even split between one and many. Does your district use the incident command system? And if you don't know what the incident command system is, chances are that answer is no. If you've been following the Fort McMurray media, you'll hear constant references being made to the incident command system, okay? You'll hear unified command, you'll hear incident commander, a lot of terminology that the EOC, the Emergency Operations Center, you hear a lot of terms that are coming out of there that relate to the incident command system. So one of the things that you need to look for within your emergency plans and your programs are direction and control. And I'm going to turn it over to the panel again to give you some insight into what that looks like. So Aaron, from industry standard.
So with direction and control, you can actually think about this from two perspectives. You can think about it from the administration of the plan and the maintenance, as well as there may be times where we actually need to respond and activate our emergency teams. So in both regards, that's something where you do want to have one person that has overall responsibility. So on an administration front, one of the standards that we would look to is the CSA Z1600, and this provides the standard on emergency response, business continuity. And what we're looking for here is a program coordinator type role. So this person would have overall responsibility for the administration. Now, having the overall responsibility doesn't mean that that person is supposed to do everything related to the plan and rolling things out. There's actually a lot of people who will have responsibilities on that, but what the program coordinator would do is then be able to share that accountability out. So they're taking the overall responsibility, but then there's the setting of expectations. Well, what do we actually need to do to keep our plans current? So once we have the right protocols in place, the right standards in place, well, what are the metrics that we're going to use to evaluate how we're doing? So what training are we doing? What sort of drills are we practicing each year? What policies do we have in place for that? What sort of checklists are we working from? How do we know that our plans are current? So these become important metrics to be able to see how we're doing as districts. From an emergency response standpoint, one of the key standards that you'll want to work from is the incident command system. So here in Alberta, Emergency Management Alberta has aligned itself to incident command system. So they're looking for organizations in Alberta to work from that framework. And the benefit of doing so is that now we have a common framework to operate from. So instead of schools and fire and police and government and utilities and industry all having different frameworks, now we're working from a common one. And that's really helpful because now it gives us a common language, it gives us a common system. So it really does allow us to be more effective in that response. And particularly when we're looking at these community-wide problems, it really shows its value. Within the district, we would want both at a site level to understand who would be taking charge of time of emergency, but also there's a role at the district level, so we would have some accountability there as well.
Laura, can you talk about your program coordinator role that you have and how some of you are doing your district staff training, please?
Sure. So the program coordinator, the main program coordinator in our division has been our assistant superintendent of business, who delegates a lot of the responsibilities to our safety officer. But it doesn't really matter who the program coordinator is, so long as you have a champion and somebody who will really unfold some of the key things like supporting the school and sites in their emergency response and activate the district emergency response plan, manage the overall strategic direction, for example. And that's probably the most important. In terms of our district safety trained, we've worked with Hour Zero for several years, and Erin and Donna come up and we'll go through a training process with the district staff regularly. Our safety officer goes through every one of the binders that we have that are, and guides that we have that are nicely laid out for us. And then the district staff are trained, and they're trained with the same formal certification training as the firefighters and the RCMP. This really keeps us on the same page and really enhances the communication.
Thank you. And Brian, from your perspective and some of the things that you've experienced.
Sure. So, I want to go back a number of years around the motivation in Prairie Rose to get involved in all of this. So, this last April was the 10th anniversary of a horrific motor vehicle accident just very next door to our consolidated high school. There's an intersection right at the very corner of the school, and unfortunately at lunch hour one day, 3 boys climbed into a car, and they were coming back. They'd gone down the road, just went for a drive. We were coming back, and they figured that they were going to beat the vehicle coming perpendicular to them. They blew through a stop sign, and they didn't beat it, they met it. And we had no training at that particular point, really. We thought we did, but we didn't. And so, of course, we have a critical incident team, including we have a family school liaison worker program, and there are employees, and so, of course, those folks were deployed. But by the time we got to the site, we got really confused with our roles. And rather than sort of looking at critical incident stress management, they ended up, as did I, getting involved in just simply trying to deal with the incident itself. So number one is we really didn't have a plan, so what we learned there is, take the time it takes no matter what happens to get a plan in place. And number two is make sure you know what your roles are. So what we did right after that is we actually went to Regina the next year, and that group, that same family school liaison worker group, and myself were trained in the incident command system. And the problem is that it wasn't nearly wide enough. I mean, and in fact, really, we were training the wrong group, because that's not really their role anyway, but at least we got a better perception of what our role is. So the key message that I'd be delivering today as part of this slide would be, whether or not you're involved in Hour Zero, the heart of and the reason that we got into Hour Zero was because at the core of Hour Zero is the incident command system. And so as a result of that, we have a much better idea of whose role is what, kind of back to the district team and the schools team and the importance of that. And again, something that helps us there too, I guess, is Hour Zero Online, which so all of the resources, and there's 1 million resources available, are all online. And so any of our staff and emergency responders can access the parts of our plan that they need, and only the part that they need. So for example, we have 3 RCMP detachments in Prairie Rose. Not just one, we have 3, because we're so far spread out. And they all have access to the school floor plans on Hour Zero Online, but they don't have access to confidential staff information, for example. So everybody can, at the click of a mouse, get to where they need to go to get the information they need, and of course it's constantly updated. So it's all fresh information. So I mean, those would be, I guess, a couple lessons learned.
Thank you. Establishing that champion is a really core part of it. Often when we ask school districts, who is your point person? And we get a mirage of individual names and numbers, and I'm not sure. And much like your budget process, you have a secretary-treasurer that is responsible for your budget process. They don't do all the budgeting, and they don't do all the data entry. They don't, everybody's involved with that budget in some capacity, but you have a point person, and you know to go to for the answers or to keep that process going and keep you in line. And that's really what that program coordinator is doing. Schools have autonomy to create response protocols. So they're creating their own response protocols. Is that happening at your school district? You have a well-defined student release process at your school district. Other than pulling the, dismissal bell, okay, that's. So your school plans, there's two parts to your emergency program, really. What happens at your schools and what happens at the district level. So Erin, I'm going to ask you to talk a little bit about some of the things to look for within your school plan.
So looking at some of the best practices from the school perspective, a lot of times that's where the focus is being on the school level. That's where the students are. A lot of the responsibility is being pushed down to the school level. The things that I would recognize as best practices at the school is that you want to have some common foundation response protocols, and not define school by school, but these would be district-wide ones. So we don't want to have multiple definitions of how we do lockdowns. We want to stay away from code words. It shouldn't be a code word that initiates a lockdown at a particular school. If we have itinerant staff, if we have people who are working from the district office going into a school, we want them to be able to hear lockdown and understand very specifically what that means. So that common foundation definition of what the protocol is becomes very important. It's not to say that site-specific information isn't going to come into play. You do want to know, keeping with the lockdown example, you do want to know, well, where are our lockdown spaces? How do we lock down? There's going to be time of day things that come into play. So if we're at lunch and people are in a cafeteria, how does that change our lockdown approach? So we do need to know that. We do need to do those risk assessments. But when we're actually looking to announce the lockdown, we want to know what that is. And we still see this as a challenge point for school districts. There's been a movement to get behind a protocol called hold and secure. Hold and secure. So this is something that originated in Ontario. Ontario Police, RCMP have gotten behind it. A few years back, police chiefs across Canada, when they met, they looked to hold and secure as being a best practice. So it's really emerged as something that provides a lot of clarity to threat of violence scenarios. So something to look for within your school district. If you're calling a lockdown something that you're doing for both inside problems as well as problems in the community, that's going to set up for certain problems. You want to have the clarity to know hold and secure. It's outside of my school building. It's something where we can focus on exterior doors. Lockdown is something inside. I can now look for interior lockdown spaces. So the clarity of these protocol responses, it actually goes beyond your school district and individual schools. It's something where there's considerable value if the entire community is aligning to these common definitions as well. We don't want to have the separate schools and the public schools and the francophone schools all using different protocols. Really, province-wide, we should have some common definitions around these. It's something where it makes life so much easier for the community response when we have the public and the separate schools sitting right next to each other. Another best practice is related to the perspective of who's looking at the protocols. A lot of times we'll see a flip chart that is given to everybody, whether I'm the classroom teacher, the principal at the school, the person at the administrative office. Truly, it's a different perspective and different focus that we have. What we want is we want some foundation protocols being understood district-wide, but then the lead teams at the schools, they can focus in on the incident specific, so that if you had the bomb threat or if you had the missing student or the chain derailment, they're going to be taking on that leadership role, so they should have that higher level of understanding. The site-specific information, often this can translate well into emergency maps, so being able to define shelter-in-place spaces for severe weather, lockdown spaces, utility shutoffs. Some of it can also be site-specific documentation, who's going to do the hold and secure, locking of exterior doors. But that should be things that are added on to those foundation pieces that we want to see at school levels.
Laura, what are some of the examples from your school district that have helped you along the way?
Yeah, so we have the site emergency maps. We actually have every room photographed with a 360-degree lens. We have maps for the lockdown maps, fire system maps, shelter-in-place maps, evacuation maps. This goes way beyond code. We also have all of our maps can be updated locally, so if we do a renovation and pull out a wall, that can be uploaded right away to our mapping system. And then for our emergency supply kits, there's no scrambling when there's an emergency. These are contained in trunks and carrying cases. They're clearly labeled with what they are. They're checked regularly, and all the items in there are renewed by our safety officer, so that's one of his jobs, that he regularly will look at that. There are school incident command post kits, classroom emergency supplies, incident command post kits, first aid kits, and those are all inclusive in those. As well, there are status cards, quick reference guides, vests for the emergency teams, and water and food rations.
Thank you, Laura. Brian, how are some of the protocols being used, and some of your success stories at your schools related to protocols?
Yeah, well, and they're not all success stories. Some of them are failure stories, but you learn from those, and you try to turn them into a success story. So maybe I'll just start with the quick reference guides. That's the easy one. Absolutely awesome. I mean, some of what you're hearing today, if you're not familiar with the language, it seems overwhelming, and you leave here in despair. You know, I think the quick reference guides are a real area of hope. Because no matter how well you're trained, different people react differently to adversity, and some people handle it really well, and some people, you know, virtually go brain dead, right? So the quick reference guides are awesome. Keep it simple. It's, you know, this is what you need to do in this particular scenario or whatever the emergency might be. Very handy, quick little flip charts on different kinds of things, and as a staff member, okay, there it is. You know, this is where I get started. So very, very helpful. In terms of consistent protocols, I mean, we need to get beyond even a school district with consistent protocols, as Aaron already mentioned. You know, we had an incident in March, and this happened in other places other than southeastern Alberta. I was aware that this is a situation similar, exact same similar, in fact, same perpetrator in Edmonton. But we had students in our district and in the Medicine Hat Catholic district. So we're the area surrounding Medicine Hat, and so there's three main school divisions, 4 school divisions, including the Francophone, but Medicine Hat Public 76 and Medicine Hat Catholic Board as well. And one of our schools also had students who had received multimedia threats, okay, through their phones, text messaging basically. And the threats were quite direct, so students were named, and the threats were quite clear. Which again, in VITRA protocol, violent threat risk assessment protocol, you know, increases the level of risk. And the issue that we learned from here was 3 districts handled this in 3 different ways. And of course, we have parents who have students in multiple districts. You know, we share families. And families were getting inconsistent messaging from the school divisions because we weren't on the same protocols. We weren't all necessarily using Incident Command Center, understandably, system, sorry, and communication tools are different too, right? So that's, you know, another lesson learned. So, you know, the good news from this, you know, and we got into some trouble with our parents, and understandably so. We should have. But the number of good news things from this. Number one is they have identified the perpetrator. So this girl, 18-year-old in Ontario, is where the threats were from. They were finally, through forensics and nailing down her computer and, you know, Canada-wide cooperation, right, in terms of protocols with the police. She's just been charged here in the last 2 weeks, I think, you know, with that particular incident and others in Alberta and across the country. It was a copycat from a situation in Missouri back in 2013. But the good news is we are, as 3 districts now, we have gotten together, and there's a commitment to get to some of the key aspects of the Incident Command Center. So these districts are not necessarily using Hour Zero. And we are going to have a summary document for all of our parents that we will be distributing with school startup. And another very, very important factor is we will be having a meeting with all of our local media near the end of August, because they have no clue about language. And in fact, were very hurtful to us in terms of their communication. And you know, our parents went to social media instead of coming to our website where the information was the right language and the right protocols. They went to the media, of course, which are using all kinds of different language. I mean, they're just making stuff up. So, you know, we've got a lot of training to do. You know, 6 years later, we've been heavily involved in this, and we're still learning. We're still learning lots, and we're still making huge mistakes. But the good news is, you know, that 3 districts getting together on this is just going to be very powerful. And the media and our parents will no longer have the excuse that, you know, they shouldn't know about some of this stuff. So,
Thank you, Brian. Just picking up on something that Brian said, that as recent as last weekend, the Canadian Journalism Association met in Edmonton. It was their national conference. And I spoke with the board members related to it, in that the way that they report impacts schools. The language they use, and if they don't know what they're talking about, the confusion spreads throughout the community. And that they can, how easy it is to damage the reputation of a school by using incorrect language. The difference between a lockdown where a threat of violence is inside your school versus a hold and secure where it's a community problem. It is not the school's, it is not something that's happening within the school. It's outside of the school, and it's a community problem. Yet the reputation of a school is then being, people start to think, are those schools safe? If they're in constant lockdown scenarios, is that school safe to be sending my child to? And that then becomes a bit of a cancer that starts to spread throughout the school community. And you have enough challenges as board members to maintain the reputation of your schools, whether it be through achievement results or whether it be through other activities that are happening. How do you manage it? So the media plays a huge role in it, and educating the media on what terminology is and what the true impact of those events are. There is a major report that was issued last year related to the number of school shootings over the last 13 years. Now, based on what you read in the media right now, you would think that was a common occurrence. Over the course of 13 years, 147 have actually occurred. Over 13 years. That's all that has occurred. Schools are still amongst the safest places to be in our society, yet that message doesn't seem to be getting across because it becomes sensationalized. Included in that report were incidents of college students after frat parties in a U.S. environment shooting the other person by accident in the foot because they had a gun in their glove compartment. 2 o'clock in the morning, college campus, frat party. I don't think that constitutes a school shooting, yet those are being reported as such. And it really impacts what's happening, the perception that people have with schools. Sorry, I get on a bit of a soapbox and you gave it to me. Our district has identified an EOC where staff have been trained, EOC being an Emergency Operations Center. The admin office personnel have defined roles in emergencies. Central administration office personnel have defined roles. So let's explore what happens at the district office. What happens, that's something that is the umbrella for your emergency plans. Aaron, do you want to start?
Yes, thank you. So just with the polling results, that's nice to see, because a lot of times the district level plan is something that is forgotten about. It's something where, because a lot of the focus is happening at that school level, that we forget that there are things that we need to do at the district level. And that happens on a few different levels. So we must first recognize that the problem could actually happen at the district office. So what would district office personnel do if there was a threat of violence scenario, or if the tornado was potentially going to hit the district office, and people who are working on that. So we have a lot of trustees here today. So have you been trained on what to do as well? If you had a board meeting and something were to happen, well, what would some of the response strategies be there? So with the emergency plans, you quickly recognize that really every stakeholder related to a school district also they have a role within the emergency plan. So that's something that they need to be aware of what to do and train against that, do some drills. Up and beyond understanding the basic response, there are more of the function or department area plans, so transportation, communications, technology, what are the facilities, what are some of the response plans that need to be worked out ahead of time, and how do they dovetail into a district-wide response. And then really with the Emergency Operations Center, that becomes an important tool for the district in that how do we support schools when an emergency exceeds their ability to deal with that, or if there's coordination that needs to happen across an entire community. We've seen too many examples of these in recent days, so the wildfire is certainly top of mind, but also the flooding. We think beyond that, the train derailments, any sort of hazardous material spill, weather. So there is a role for the district office to really work with all the schools district-wide to make sure that we've got that consistent response. And there's things that shouldn't be happening at the school. Within ICS, there's a role called the information officer. So with the communications, we've already heard examples of how the communications are paramount. And in a lot of cases, you might not actually get hit by the incident. You might not have the tornado hit one of your schools or the threat of violence reach one of your schools, but in all of those cases, the parents hit the schools, and the parents can quickly become the incident for you. So being able to communicate and get in front of the parents, be first, be credible. That's something that we want the school district to be the go-to source of information, so that the message getting out to the parents is that, hey, we're in hold and secure, all of our students are safe and accounted for, there's a community threat of violence happening, the police are investigating, please protect your safety, stay at home so that you don't get embroiled in this situation. Much different message than, hey, there's a shooter loose, all the community's in lockdown. So that messaging becomes very important and is a big part of that incident response as well.
Thank you. Laura, can you tell them about a little bit about some of the communication tools, and that you've had a lot of success stories related to that?
Yeah. So as you heard from our speaker this morning, and it's been communicated here already, is the school district can put a lot of great things in place, but if your communication fails, it goes south very, very quickly. So the key
it goes to Brian's. No, I'm sorry.
Yeah. So the key to the communication system is that we use very common language. We don't use any codes so that we can communicate openly. There are several templates on the Hour Zero site, and we've used those consistently for death of a student, train derailment, pandemic possibility, all of those things. And our communication officer will get communications out to the trustees, to the staff and schools that are involved. And what these brief communique do is they allow people to respond to it without being caught. They are told what you can say and what you should avoid. There's nothing worse than not even having a good grasp of the information as a trustee, being caught in the grocery store and needing to try to respond to that. And if you say something a little bit more than you should, then we all know what can happen as an elected official. So one of the positive things about the communication is this is an email that I received from an emergency responder. Thursday afternoon in one of our schools, there was an alleged shooter, a person walking across the playground with what people thought was a gun. And so the school went down into hold and secure, and the first responders were called, and they came, and the incident finished. But they sent me an email and it said the response to the incident with the gun-carrying person at X school was so well handled by everyone. The message you sent and the process of reading the same message to staff and students was very effective. RCMP said how well prepared school division students and staff was evident. And often as a school district, that's not the kind of communication that I get after an emergency. So this was very nice.
Thank you, Laura. Brian?
Sure, just again, a couple real-life scenarios, I guess, to drive home the point. In the first example where I talked about the text threat from Ontario, I and my communications coordinator were in Banff at the Rural Education Symposium at that time. So, about 7:45 in the morning, as I'm on my way to the conference from my room, I get the text message that we've received these threats. And our point person for our district plan was back at central office. And so we set up our own emergency operations center, the two of us, in Banff. And we kind of ended up locking ourselves away in a room for a while. And we, as part of our plans, realized that these were the three of us were the main people from our team that needed to be involved. And so that's how we handled that. Another true story, very similar to the one that you heard, is in southern Alberta. 16-team tournament, volleyball tournament in one of the communities. There's, probably 6-7 different school divisions involved. And Hunter is on his way home in one of our rural communities. But of course, it was right at about dusk, and a bus driver reported to the tournament director that a shooter was outside. And so, of course, you can imagine what that looks like. Now this is not only 3 districts, but it's across southern Alberta. And, when it comes to training, I think school divisions in some cases are way more trained even than the RCMP. So when it comes to violent threat risk assessment protocols, we train the police. You'd think it would be the other way around, like in terms of assessments and the tools and all of that. We train them, not the other way around. And I think in terms of language now, with all of the first responders, again, using some of the systems that are in place, we can talk the same language, and that makes things, I think, go a whole lot better. I think in terms of the emergency protocols that are in place, in Prairie Rose, in the last 3 years, we have turned over roles, not necessarily people, but turned over people and roles in all 9 of our lead positions. So from superintendent right down to director of inclusion to whatever, the entire team is either in a different role or we have new people. So it never ends, right? The training never ends. Updating roles and updating the training on an ongoing basis is, I think, also absolutely crucial. And the final part is it's great to have these VITRA protocols. It's great to have the safety protocols in place. But again, without the communication tools, so we have recently gotten into a software program called School Messenger. They're fairly new to Canada, but I'll tell you what, it was a really good decision. And now our communication with our media, with our parents, I can send a message in minutes to every single parent in the school division by email, by text, by voicemail message, home phone. And it's very easy to use. And that's made a huge difference in increasing our confidence. We haven't used it a whole lot yet. And in the incident that I was referring to in March, we were actually not quite ready to hit the send button on the implementation of that software. It would have gone better had we had it at that time. Our communication home would have been improved, but that's really improved our confidence that next time we will get it right.
Thank you, Brian. I think you may have answered this already. All our trustees have received training on response protocols. As a trustee, I regularly see reports showing drill completions at all of our schools. So, creating the program to start with, and then continually testing and training against it, but keeping it current is where the challenges lie. Because the moment that becomes outdated, the moment that you're at risk. So let's talk about that a little bit. Aaron?
What we're trying to achieve here is is really we want to set up a culture of preparedness within the school district. It's something a lot of times we can dwell on the fear aspect. And yes, this stuff can happen, and there's lots of examples of it. You don't need to go to the national big events. Really, there's probably examples within your school district of things that have occurred at various schools. So it's something where people understand that this stuff can happen. So it's really the question now of, well, if it could happen, let's just understand what our strategies are to respond. It's something that let's answer the tough questions ahead of time, and then we can put that in the back pocket. And as difficult as an implementation project might be to put in an emergency program, really the true challenge is how do you maintain that? So this training, testing, and maintenance really is focusing in on how do we keep things current, how do we keep them up to date, how do we keep it accurate? And there's a few ways that you can do that. There's a few metrics that you're going to want to follow to do that. So what training are we committing to each year? So is it the safety talk? Are there particular areas that we're looking at? Maybe incident command system? Are there certain protocols? Maybe lockdown, hold and secure. So what training do we want to see to keep people informed? Because you will have turnover, you will have new people after a summer break, people will forget. So how do we train? From there, our drills. What are we going to practice? By fire code, you need to do 6 evacuation fire drills, 3 per semester. But apart from that, there's a lot that needs to be defined within the school district. Are we going to commit to 2 lockdowns? Are we going to try a shelter in place? What other drills might we do? The concept of the checklist becomes very important. So what are the tasks that we're looking for each site to do each year to keep things current? That checklist, the drills, and the training really give you a really good pulse on how the schools and the school district is doing in terms of the readiness. The old adage that experience is a hard teacher, it gives you the test first and then the learnings happen afterward, really apply to emergency response. You can learn a lot from an emergency, responding to that emergency, but if you can learn some of those lessons ahead of time by putting in your program, training, and doing drills against that, then you can hopefully avoid a lot of potential pitfalls and have a much better response in the end.
Thank you. Laura, let's explore some of these training strategies and some of the initiatives that you've taken on.
Okay, so staff training initiatives can take many options. There's online courses through our Zero website. They can be assigned or they can be optional. There's online training and guides, and there's tabletop exercises. So at our division, we have done all of those. EOC and school joint training. We have staff training and tabletop exercises with the district staff and the area admin regularly. And in those tabletop exercises, they're a mock disaster. We spend a day and we go through the actual disaster as if it was actually happening, phoning each other instead of just talking. And it's inclusive of a student release exercise at the end. The board, in order to keep our board as updated as possible, we do have every August, we have a presentation to them on what we have been doing for safety, what we have been doing in the emergency response, so they get an overview of what has happened. And when we're doing our tabletop exercises, we actually email the trustees and say, we're doing a tabletop exercise. This is, it's a practice exercise, but I am going to communicate to you the events of this just like it was real. So you're going to get, your cell phone is going to keep pinging with my information. But if something actually happens, it's going to be real world. I'm going to say this is the real world, something is actually happening, so you're not saying I'm playing still. And so that kind of keeps them in the loop and gives them the information about what would happen and how would they be involved and how would they be kept informed if a disaster were actually happening in their division, in one of their schools or in one of their areas. Should I go on with the student release?
Sure, Laura, why don't you touch on student release?
Okay, I asked if I could share the story because it was kind of good. It's actually a really good measure of effective learning. So lots of times you do the tabletop and you try to teach your staff and what you can do in emergency response, but you never know if it's actually working until you have a disaster, and you're actually really hoping you don't have the disaster. But a couple of weeks ago, there was a sewer backup in our elementary school, and so it wasn't a real disaster until you put 400 kids on the playground and say you can't flush a toilet, because the first thing that happens is about 200 of them need to go to the bathroom. So we made a decision to move the K-3 to the high school and the 4-6 to the junior high, and their schools are about 4 blocks away. It was a beautiful, warm day in May. And the principal communicated to his staff that he wanted them to treat it as an emergency, and that the high school and junior high would be treated as evacuation centers. And that staff just flipped into gear. The secretarial staff stayed back to phone parents. The teachers went in, the kids had their backpacks and their shoes, they were lined up in alphabetical order, the teachers had the up-to-date attendance, there was no question as to who was there, who wasn't there, where the kids were supposed to be, everyone was accounted for, and they were off and down that road within 10 minutes. I stayed and waited for the last child to leave this elementary school and got in my car to drive to the high school. In the meantime, we had also put on social media that this was happening because the radio had got wind of it and was starting to ask questions. So we had tried to communicate it out through social media. The risk, of course, is that once you do that, you've got any predator understanding that there are 400 fairly vulnerable children displaced. And so by the time I got to the high school where the K-3 were, the vice principal of the elementary school and the principal of the high school had set up a student release tables right at the front door. Nobody could come in or out of the school without going through those tables. There were sheets with kids' names on them for the kids' names with the teacher's signature, and the kids were back in the gym with high school students. So when a parent came to the door to pick up a child, the high school student filled out the form, brought it into the gym. The teacher had to escort the child to the front, determine that it was, in fact, the child's parent before they handed the child over. And I was just walking on air. I thought, as a senior administrator, I just had no worry that my professionals were taking care of the kids and had learned from their training.
Thank you, Laura. Brian, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Yeah, that's awesome. We could learn from you. My story's a little bit different. You know, I think the tabletop exercises for us have been extremely humbling. I mean, you know, you think you have a bit of a plan, you think you know a little bit about this, and you go through an actual case scenario and you look at each other and you say, you know, we know nothing. We've got so much to learn. And that's actually a good thing, I think. And of course, we're better than that, but that's sort of the feeling that you get is, wow, never thought of this, never thought of this. But we did. And should it actually happen, of course, we'd be better prepared. But, you know, I'm just going to be brutally honest here because I don't know any other way. When it comes to this kind of level of emergency training, it's a lot of work. Our Alberta Teachers Association, to tell you the truth, wants to make this a C2 issue. So what's the key messaging from us? Number one, when I talk to parents prioritize safety before they prioritize learning. So I'm constantly reminding our staff of that. The other thing I'm reminding our staff is we love you, and we love our students, and we want you to be well and safe. And it kind of takes the argument away a little bit. Yeah, what are we giving up so that we can get this done? And, you know, we don't ever really seem to take much off the plate. We seem to add to it, right? But it's a priority. We love our staff. We love our students. We want you to be safe and well. And it takes a certain level of commitment, I think, to get going and to move. And, you know, if nothing else from here today, learn more about the incident command system.
Thank you, Brian. So, can I ask this question again? So is your plan complete?
Nope. Ours isn't. It's better than where it was 6 years ago, though.
It's a moving target, isn't it? You know, it's like your budget process. You need to touch it every year. It can't be something that you think that's completed and you put it on the shelf, because shelfware is not an emergency plan. It's something that you have to train on. It's something that you have to keep current. And hopefully this will have given you a bit of insight into some of the things to look for in your plans, maybe giving you some inspiration as to what to do with it, and take baby steps. I'm just going to let, we have just like a couple of minutes here. We started a little bit late. I'm just going to ask each of the panel member if they have anything that they'd like to close, or if you have any questions that you'd like to ask. Go ahead, Laura.
I guess I just want to say, when you're talking about emergency preparedness, is you're hoping that there's never an emergency, but the one way to make people feel confident is to make sure they've got the training. Then you can hope with everything that you never have an emergency, but be prepared for it, and it goes a whole lot smoother than when you're thrown into it without being prepared.
Thank you, Laura. Brian?
Hope for the best, plan for the worst.
Very succinct. And Aaron?
Work for that culture of preparedness, have the champion within the district, so you have that accountability, and then trust, but verify.
Any questions that we can try and answer for you?
I'm going to ask Brian, because I know where you stand on your trustees. Do you have the trustees involved in that system where they get notified as well? Please don't do that.
Yeah, the question is, do our trustees get, what about informing trustees and so forth? And the answer is, to a certain level, yes. Kind of, what do they need to know? So, for example, one of the situations that I was describing actually occurred at Friday night, 10 o'clock, right? So we're texting, the three of us, and trying to get a handle on this and finding out exactly what's happening. The people inside the building weren't supposed to be using their phones, right? They weren't taken away. They weren't about to take away phones from adults, but we actually did make contact with our coach that was there. And so in terms of knowing that there was a situation and status updates on the situation, our trustees, yes, again, it's now, that was done through texting, but now we can do it through Messenger, and it's just, I'm basically texting the trustees on a list, but now we can do it kind of all in one. Makes it a little bit easier. Our trustees don't have the level of training that they should. This is a really good reminder for me. If there was an emergency, they'd be taking their direction from us, not necessarily would they know themselves what to do. So we've got some work to do there.
Well, because I think it's important after listening, because for me, when we had our, what shouldn't have been a lockdown,
Yeah.
we're getting notified on social media, but we don't have the answers.
Right. Yeah,
And
good
we
point.
should, because we're
Yeah.
answering to the people.
Yeah, and the level of awareness, the executive level of awareness, that doesn't mean you need to run the show, right? You just need to be informed and educated on what those plans are. In addition, and Aaron alluded to this a little bit during his presentation, there have been incidents and that board meetings can get a little testy on certain topics. And having sat through a number of those, where the person that has come in to challenge the board on those particular instances and having had them escorted out, those individuals. And, hopefully that's not a common occurrence, but for yourselves, you need to go home safe to your families too. And those are the types of things. There was a situation that I'm sure you're all aware of that a person, and it was a U.S. situation, but we can't ignore our neighbors to the south on certain things, where the person brought in a gun to a board meeting, right? They had dismissed his wife from a position, and he came to the board meeting with his gun because the superintendent, key decision maker, HR director, key decision maker, and the board, who ultimately approved the dismissal of the individual, were all present. So he had his audience that he was looking for, and he came in. So just to keep that in mind, you need to go home safe to your families too. Any other questions? Well, thank you for being a participatory audience and for your patience with us. Thank you. And Karen?
Thanks. So Laura, Brian, Aaron, Donna, thank you so much for spending your morning with us. We really appreciated your presentation. So
Thank you. Oh, thank you.
thank you.